everyone. I hope you were able to make some good connections with your fellow attendees during the networking session. I'm Sydney Gladman. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at MII. We've already had some really great discussion during our first panel, where we discussed the big issues and opportunities to get next-gen materials commercialized. Now we'll focus on the role of communication in the adoption of next-gen materials. When industry stakeholders are communicating with one another or to the public, it's currently a tightrope balancing act to simultaneously spark interest, provide clarity, protect identity, and remain compliant. And all too important in today's climate, avoid greenwashing. So from our web descriptions, our marketing campaigns, the product labels, pitches to investors or brands, there's so many places where precise and effective communication is critical to the success of next-gen materials. Today, we're going to hear from some next-gen innovator and brand voices, a textile labeling and packaging expert, and a veteran marketing professional to hear their thoughts on this complex topic. So I want to thank you to these four amazing speakers for joining us today. I will be moderating this session, and I'd like to start by having our speakers briefly introduce themselves to the audience. So let's bring our speakers on stage. We'll start with Tricia Carey.
Thank you, Sydney. Great to be here today. So my name is Tricia Carey. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Renewcell. So I oversee the pulp sales, the business development, as well as the marketing of our branded ingredient pulp, which is Circulose. Just a little background about Renewcell is that we are a sustained tech company that recycles textiles in order to make a dissolving pulp, Circulose. After 25 years in the industry of working with man-made cellulosics, I joined Renewcell in November of last year to lead the commercial team. So very exciting times for us at Renewcell.
And we're so excited to have you on our team. I'm going to next bring James to the stage to introduce himself.
Thanks, Sydney. James LaForce, founder of and CEO of LaForce, a marketing communications agency based in New York. We've, for 25 years, worked with top retailers and apparel brands like H&M, Banana Republic, Gap, J. Crew, Macy's. Not all of them through all those 25 years, but over the course of my career in this agency. And then we've worked for materials companies like Lycra, Supima Cotton, and Swarovski. And so we have a lot of experience promoting sustainable innovation at these retailers and brands.
Thank you so much, James. All right, next we're going to bring on Amanda.
Thanks, Sydney. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Turner. I'm the VP of Product and Impact Innovation at ettitude. ettitude is a material science company and lifestyle brand founded on our clean bamboo fiber technology, which is a much cleaner way of processing raw bamboo into a versatile fiber that is a unique lyocell fiber. And yeah, very excited to be here and amongst amazing colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. All right, and our last speaker is Camilla.
Hi, Sydney. Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Camilla Mjelde. I am the Sustainability and Compliance Director at Trimco Group. Trimco Group is a labels, trims, and packaging supplier. With our supply of labels and packaging and trims, we come a large team on compliance advice. So I'm an expert in textile regulation, global regulations of what is allowed to say or not say on these wash care labels. And the last few years, I've spent a lot of time on greenwashing, consulting, what can we say and why not. And that's why I'm here. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think we have really all the experts here to talk about this very complex topic. And I have a lot of questions I want to ask the team here, but I wanted to start with one that's sort of simple. We had heard from Christine, I believe, in the previous panel that when adopting next-gen materials, bringing them to market, one of the things you do have to do is make it shiny, I think is the word that she used. You know, shiny or sexy. So I have a question for our group here. How do we make these new sustainable, innovative materials shiny or sexy while staying true to the science and the facts? So I'm going to let James start with his thoughts on that.
Well, I would argue the opposite, that we shouldn't try to make them shiny or sexy. I know some of the, I think Amanda is going to Premier Vision, and I feel like to most degree at a trade show like that, especially her offer, she wants it to be the opposite of shiny and sexy. She wants it to be credible. She wants it to be transparent. She wants to have, believable conversations with people based on trust. And selling fashion, selling brand is the opposite of that. We're selling a dream, fantasy, mystery, sex, shininess, and there's just too much science and substance in material innovation to put them in the same sentence. So I guess I would argue that we should have non-shiny, non-sexy conversations with manufacturers and retailers and keep the consumer in the land of sexy and shiny and superficial and fun.
So it's a really interesting, point of view, I think, James, is that maybe we don't need to focus on hyping or selling the materials, for more than what they are. And I think we actually heard this in the previous panels, that we don't want to, oversell and underdeliver, right? So it's all about, at this stage, maybe in our hype cycle with next gen materials, just getting down to brass tacks, right, with the communication and letting other stakeholders, like the brands who are more interfacing directly with the consumer, take the lead, right, on whatever it needs to be in terms of selling and sexiness. So I think it's an interesting perspective, because I think our material innovators feel like they have to do it all, but maybe they don't, right? Maybe they should be focusing, on different messaging and different modes of communication. So on that note, I'd like to hear from Tricia or Amanda on your thoughts on this, as kind of coming from that innovator voice. And Amanda, you also have that sort of brand voice as well. How do you balance those things? So Amanda, go first, and then Tricia after. How about that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with James on being true to the science and the actual impact that we're making at the textile level. And that's something that is 100% of our focus. We're not trying to just package it up and sell it in the shiny, beautiful box. Brands tend to expect that, but the conversations we're having with brands today are about traceability, validating every single claim that we're making. We want to make sure that we're true to the product that we're presenting in front of our brands, that there is nothing to hide. And you can hide things in shiny marketing, slogans and the way that things are being portrayed. So for us, we've always stayed true to that, and working with third parties to validate every single step of our supply chain, all of the metrics that we claim, any sort of performance attributes, because we do performance textiles as well, and make sure that we're getting third-party lab testing that's very neutral, and making sure that everything is supported and validated behind the textiles that we're bringing to market. And I agree. I think it's up to the brands to make the right decisions, to purchase the right materials, and then bring it to the consumer. And the consumer, they can continue to brand and market and do all the fun, more exciting aspects of the industry. But if they're making the right choices along the way and working with the right material suppliers, then we can, I think, truly make a transition in the market.
Great point, Amanda. Tricia, do you have anything to add, again, from the innovator angle?
Yeah, also as an innovator, and we have an ingredient brand that we're taking to the market. So our brand and our product is nothing without having a partner in that co-branding. So it's essential, but I think very important to keep it simple and clear, whether it's B2B space that we're talking or on a B2C level. And in here, the transparency is so important. And whenever we host visitors at our facility, we had our inauguration last November. And since then, we've had visits regularly. I just love what the questions come out of that and the pictures. And I love to hear the story then that others are saying about us and what captures their attention. So this is important to be transparent, keep those messages simple, clear, and we certainly want to avoid any greenwashing, although this is a very complex and complicated time within the industry, and when we look at, especially around recycling.
So that's a really good point you just made on the greenwashing, and I think we'd be remiss to not discuss it. So I actually want to go over to Camilla to talk about where she sees, compliance in the role of avoiding greenwashing, and what you do to kind of bring compliance to the table for people.
Commenting on a little bit what Amanda and Tricia has said here as well. I mean, next-gen materials, they are true to their claims. There's a big difference here when we talk about greenwashing. Greenwashing happens to brands that try to package and wrap their garments into a green cloud that is not true. And next-gen materials, I believe, are protected by these new green guides that are soon coming, we hope, and the Green Claims Directive that says exactly what Amanda says and also what Tricia says. You need to show and prove traceability and prove by third-party auditor that the claims are true and correct. When marketing materials to brands, of course, that doesn't cover consumer protecting acts as such because they are B2B. But it's so important that these next-gen materials suppliers or providers, that they stay strong and tell the brands not to take their good work and make it into greenwashing, because the brands could take it to another level and say, this is going to rescue the planet, and then all that great work of next-gen materials will be diluted by branding, if that answers the question.
It does. I think this is that same topic that came up in our previous panel, but the role of collaboration, right? So, and that communication is a really critical part of that, and making sure that all parties are invested in the whole value chain, right? So next-gen materials do have a responsibility to make sure the brands have the information they need to be truthful, right? Like Camilla says, and to avoid greenwashing, but you can't control everything, right? And so the brands have equal responsibility to, ask the tough questions, really have to be thinking a lot harder about what to say when we're putting these materials out on the market. So thank you so much for your contributions there. On that note, something that comes up a lot is the sort of changing landscape of compliance and how across the globe there's different requirements. And I wondered, Camilla, if you have any thoughts on, how to deal with that kind of complexity.
Yeah. Global compliance, there are many areas. One area which is particularly interesting today, I think, is textile regulation compliance, which regulates what's on that simple care label. And that simple care label is regulated with these generic fiber names that are allowed to use. And so viscose and lyocell and in the US also have rayon. So the care label is an area of generic fiber names. And we shouldn't mix up the care labels with what is marketing communication on packaging or hang tags or QR codes like that. So a brand may find it really difficult to navigate here because in some areas, Europe, US, Asia don't quite agree on all of this. But what we can agree on in terms of next-gen materials is this honesty aspect, which you all do so great. This is really what it is. And you're marketing it and talking about it in the right way. And then we need to separate textile regulation, which is on that care label, which is generic fiber names, compared to a marketing area where the Consumer Protection Act gets involved.
That's a really good point. And I have a question for some of these really new to the world innovations that are going to come to play soon that may not fit into a currently existing category on that label. What are we going to do about those?
Yeah. So in Europe, you apply. So there are today less than 50 generic fiber names. If you have a true innovation that cannot fit into any of those chemicals, a full chemical document, if your polymers and your connection and chemical setup cannot fit into any of them, you can apply. And then you get a new name. And it's been quite some time since we had a new name. I'm sure Tricia and Amanda will get us a new name soon, and I'm excited to use it.
What's the new name?
A new generic fiber that is allowed to use in Europe.
Yeah,
there is only 49.
Is there, in fact, an example of one?
Well, the last one was 1992 with lyocell. Since then, it's a very challenging. I mean, what I've heard in the market is it could be as much as like 5 million to actually invest in a new name, and then of course you have to go through all the education. And James, we know that requires quite a bit. From Renewcell, there will not be a new generic name because we only manufacture the pulp. So we are not, we would not qualify then for a new generic fiber name. But within the innovator space, I do see that there will be some changes and some new generic terms that will come out.
I mean, I think that, I mean, 5 million sort of seems cheap to, if there's only 50 to get, to be able, I mean, it seems worth it to invest because, I mean, back to the, and maybe we've moved on from the, you know, what's sexy and what's not sexy, but
we haven't moved on.
I do think a single word, you know, I mean, I hadn't recalled lyocell from 1992, and I don't know, I guess people are still talking about it. But I mean, you know, to own a new name, you know, it's kind of like a pharmaceutical or something like that. I mean, it's, you know, so if people are, you know, buying in and you have essentially exclusive rights to it, it would seem like a worthwhile investment to have a name. Because I was thinking a single name, you know, if you're looking for something to be sexy, and I think we except for Camilla, I'm sorry, you're not sexy, and there's just no way care label is ever, just the words care label are such a buzzkill to me. But pulp, Tricia, I think is just sexy in and of itself. I mean, like, in other words, we don't really use pulp. I mean, not since Anita Bryant said, you know, that you could get orange juice without pulp. You know, people very rarely use that word. So when you start bringing it into the conversation around clothes or fiber or whatever, I think when you just say pulp, you immediately get it. And then Amanda, I think clean bamboo is really sexy. I think the combination of those two words, if you just said bamboo, I feel like bamboo was sexy 20 years ago. Now I realized that I was being seduced by dirty bamboo. And now there's clean bamboo. It's like, you know, that by definition, those two words together, you know, are sexy. And I think circularity, while a little wonky, you know, everybody sort of gets it right away. Again, I wouldn't say necessarily sexy or shiny, but I feel like it's clear and concise, and it sort of immediately gets us all onto a subject that I think everybody feel pretty good about and feel like they want to be part of. And I do think in that, a word that is sexy now that is part of circularity is the word vintage. You know, so people who are in vintage, you know, sort of get to be part of circularity without being wonky.
That's really good points, right? On how emotional we can have these ties to these words and how they can carry a lot of weight. But then on the other hand, right, like back to what Camilla mentioned, right, you can't put clean bamboo on the label, on the actual care label. So you have to balance where you use what words, right? And this, it's very complex, a very complicated thing to do. So, you know, on the note of these new materials that don't have a place on the care label yet, we've got people coming up with algae-based fibers, for example, and I don't think that they will be able to fit into an existing sort of nomenclature. We have people doing novel proteins, for example, inspired by squid protein. There's a company doing this. Totally new. We have nowhere to put this material yet, and they're very new in their journey. And I can tell you right now, they don't have $5 million to spend on just going through this process yet, right? Hopefully we'll get there. But there's so much I think we need to do and kind of collaborate on best practices moving forward to get all this information out there. And maybe there's an other on the care label, right, that kind of satisfies the need until we come up with these new words. I don't know, right? We've got to figure out what to do.
Is there somebody participating in this conference that's exploring human hair?
There is a company exploring human hair. I'm not sure if they're at our conference, but there is, yeah.
I mean, I think that sounds sexy. And when I've mentioned that to a few people, they get immediately very sort of triggered by it and kind of freaked out by it, which is always the beginning of a good idea, I think.
See, that's a good perspective, right?
When people are frightened,
getting people a response. It doesn't matter maybe what the response is immediately, but you need to trigger a response. Yeah, I mean,
I just figured, like, from labeling that, you know, because it already exists, you know, how you would, you can buy, I think you probably still, I don't know if you can still buy a wig made of 100% human hair. I didn't know if that was legal. I'm sure it's not ethical. But anyway, the idea of that as the ingredient of a fiber is pretty cool.
It's
not as cool as clean bamboo,
right? As long as it's exciting, it's a good move.
Yeah.
So on that note of legal that you just mentioned, James, legal and ethical, I have a question for Amanda, actually. There's been some recent legislation that has come out in Europe that has said that the word leather can only be applied to animal skins, right? So from cows and goats and other sources. And there's people out there that might use the term, for example, next gen leather or vegan leather that might be under fire. And Amanda, her materials have often been, likened to vegan silk or vegan cashmere. And we wonder if similar sort of, issues might persist down the road. Now, where these legislations come from is that they claim that consumers are confused by the terminology. And I'd love to see what Amanda's perspective is on, using terms like vegan silk and vegan cashmere to talk about her materials.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, vegan can be an interesting statement. It can help clarify, but it can also cause confusion because you can hide synthetics behind vegan as well. So for us, we don't necessarily lead with vegan silk or vegan cashmere. It's an additional descriptor, but we always focus on the facts, which is, we're 100% pure bamboo lyocell, a plant alternative. So there's description that goes with it. It can't just be that one statement, that's it, and let the consumer try to figure it out. There's so much more that has to go behind it. And we're constantly challenged with having to educate just on bamboo in general, clean bamboo. Bamboo has such a stigma in the industry of being such a terrible material. And because we have an alternative process that is truly clean and is having a tremendous impact, there's a lot of education that goes along with it. And I think I welcome these changes in compliance to be more clear. I think that it is required so that the consumer who isn't in the conversation every day isn't as into the details of the materials, and they're just one look, looking at a hang tag, oh, this is good for the environment because it's vegan, and buying it, but it's actually PVC. That's not a good solution. So I think the regulation is on point and needs to continue to help force that transparency. And we'll continue to evolve with the conversation, and I think use different descriptors that then do hit on the consumer to help them understand better what we're using.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's actually a reason that MII, we don't use the term vegan, like you just said, because that doesn't tell you anything other than there's no animals, where our mission is these materials need to also be high performance and environmentally preferable, right? So we use the term next gen. It has been adopted in various settings now, but now consumers need to know what that means as well, right? We have to, continue to educate and refine the terminology there. And on that note of, communicating sort of, you have to get to the point pretty quickly, and you need to do this with different stakeholders along the way in your journey. I wanted to ask, Tricia, when you have to talk to brand customers, manufacturing partners, investors, right? How do you have to change the way you might need to communicate to be effective, or do you keep it consistent? Really, how does that work for you, since there's so many stakeholders you need to continually communicate with?
Yeah, I mean, Sydney, good point. It's always key that you know who your audience is, and kind of it's always leveling up of information. So I always like to use a lot of tools and visuals. That's key. And actually here, I just had a meeting, so I have all my little bit, because I think, there are those visual learners. We also have a lot of videos that we use, because I think that really helps to understand. And I think no matter who that stakeholder is, they get, simple concepts of, recycling textiles, but they need to see where everyone is sitting within the network. And I'm purposely not saying chain here, because we do have to switch the way that we've been visualizing how we bring products to market. So I think, having all of these different tools, I do think we need to, as an industry, redefine and come up with those definitions. As you're saying, next gen, I think that's getting more accepted and understood by the industry, but where can we go to have clear definitions on these terms that are being used? And I do see that some organizations like Accelerating Circularity are also putting together a glossary of terms so that it can help and people can go there for reference, because everyone learns in a different way. We also utilize social media quite a bit to get the message across. And certainly platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram help. But again, does somebody are they an Instagram person? Tends to be more on the designer side. Do they like a direct email that comes into their inbox as a way to educate and connect? But knowing your audience is key.
Okay, that's a really good point. Amanda, do you have anything to add there, since you also really have to kind of, along the entire value chain, talk to different people along the way? How have you approached that journey?
Yeah, I mean, exactly the same. You have to reposition the conversation depending on who you're speaking with. You know, if we're talking to investors, they want to understand risk and mitigating risk more than anything, and trying to understand, you know, who is in the landscape that you're talking about, and how are you going to continue to grow and scale. And then you're shifting to consumer facing. We have a lifestyle brand that we're selling bedding to the consumer, and you know, that is a different conversation. The consumer is looking for performance first. They want to understand, how is this going to make me feel? How am I going to experience the textiles first? We sell bedding, so we've really leaned into doing a study on how does it improve your sleep, because that is truly what the consumer is looking for. And then the cherry on top is the clean bamboo is good for, you know, it has a reduced impact, and it is a more sustainable solution than cotton. So it's a layered communication strategy, and those layers in terms of priority and hierarchy shift depending on who you're speaking to.
Very good point. So one of the things when it comes to the external communication, it seems that there's a couple departments that at brands need to kind of work together to come together on the correct messaging. And it seems like it's, you know, marketing and PR and communications needs to talk to, you know, ESG and CSR and those folks, right? The environmental and compliance folks. And Camilla, I feel like you probably have a lot of experience with seeing how we can get these people to get on the same wavelength. I wonder if you can give any learnings from that.
I have great meetings with brands where meeting their sustainability ESG team, and they make amazing effort and working on traceability and on documentation of all claims. But then when we go to the website or to the actual hang tags, and we'll be about, but why does it say here that this is, you know, carbon or net zero, or it's this, that, or that? And the people sitting on sourcing, ESG, sustainability, like, well, that's the PR people. Like, I don't have anything to do with them. I never talk to them. I don't know who they are. And it's like, well, they are putting it out there, so there needs to be a connection. So whereas I used to hold a lot of training and seminars with the typical sourcing and sustainability team, I specifically ask, please, could you ask your PR to also come, so that they can see what is the difference between a claim of a whole product and the whole product's LCA, the whole life cycle. What is that compared to a single claim about its material and about the material environmental claim? Like, what's the difference, and how do you need to guide that? And I believe so many companies are doing amazing true work, and they get shut down for greenwashing because PR today are not the one have to be involved in actually learning this complicated stuff. So a lot of bridges to build there, and it will solve a lot, I think.
So James then, right, she just put you guys under fire a little bit there. The PR guys are in trouble. What do you think when it comes to, you know, like working together with, right, the kind of technical teams and the marketing teams having to come together? What's your experience there and how that's worked in the past?
Well, yeah, I mean, ideally, of course, we should be doing exactly what Camilla is saying, and we should go to those meetings. Of course, you know, we're not the brightest people. No, I mean, you know, we'd have to pay attention and everything. And really understand it. And to Tricia's point, you know, we're all different kinds of learners. You know, we would need the video and the Instagram post and the direct email and the LinkedIn, you know, so I mean, to get it in our heads. But we're so busy thinking about what our audience wants to hear, you know, and so we're always working backwards from what they'll listen to, what they'll pay attention to, what an editor, for instance, a gatekeeper is going to want to hear about, and so we tend to, misinterpret or gloss over or generalize, which is, the worst part of our business, and I'm not advocating for that, misinformation. So I think there's an obligation to really understand it and be prepared for the audiences that will listen. And then we have that same obligation to explain to those people, Camilla, in your meeting, that there's a point at which we shouldn't be bothering a particular audience, consumer, press, et cetera, with some of these things. We're going to have an unreceptive audience, and there's lots of parts of the supply chain that, we just have a responsibility as humans to make sure is as clean and ethical as we can make it. And it's not something that we have to run and be promoting and PRing and communicating to consumers. It's an expectation that we have safe work environments and that we are not, deliberately damaging the environment. And so therefore, it's sort of back to what I originally said. I think it would be better to communicate nothing than to communicate the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty good point.
I would add to that too. I think that James and PR and that world needs to continue to lean into their strong suit. They know how to communicate what people are listening to, and it's the responsibility internally within the brand to make sure that communication before it gets published goes through and is audited and is accurate, and make sure that there's someone internally that is checking it and it does catch any of those miscommunications or mislabeling in the process before it does get published. Because you can't expect then, PR and marketing teams to totally just get it and understand and be educated fully. I think that there is some level of responsibility of learning and growing for sure, especially if you're focused on this segment of the industry. But I think there's also that internal audit that needs to happen to try to catch anything so that it doesn't get published inaccurately.
I really love that point, Amanda. I'm also like a personal advocate of the quality control, kind of process. I think it should work in every aspect of our lives. So I really like that point.
Yeah.
The other sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that. Yeah, I mean, it's so important right now, the role of press within educating and getting out into the market. And I think, not only do the companies that they're covering need to be represented fairly, and certainly it needs to be reviewed, but also the facts that they have. There's a lot of factoids that keep getting put out around the fashion industry, and they get repeated. And it's like that old telephone game when you were a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and then they keep evolving and changing, and then everybody forgets where it even came from. And there was a great report that Transformers Foundation had put out around go back and look to the root of where those facts came from. And is that right? So also within PR press is to make sure that we have the numbers right if we're going to state this, and then, that the stories are verified. But right now it's key. And I can say, from the growth of Renewcell, we've had incredible press. We had an amazing story from the New York Times in December, that front page from Alden Wicker. And today a customer sent that to me again. So, here it is 7 months later, and people are still reading this story. So the impact of press is there.
Yeah, I believe they would call them ghost statistics, right? Because we don't know what the original source is. It's just faded into,
Right.
I also think it's hard for us, right? We're people who try to educate and communicate on these statistics. And I don't know what to believe or trust either, right? We all know that there are high greenhouse gas emissions, there are low recycling rates, things like this, right? But we don't really know the actual numbers and where the information came from. And so we probably need to work together to make that information more clear and robust.
I mean, Tricia, one of the things that I think, we know what's happening in the media landscape, the consolidation and a kind of there are fewer and fewer voices. So there is an opportunity, and there are a number of journalists out there who are making it their bread and butter to become the sort of go-to resource. And so I think things are moving in our favor, that there'll be more accurate reporting, and that people will get educated. There's just a long learning curve in the process.
If I could add to Amanda's point, what she said about the performance, that you're communicating the performance of the materials, and also what she said, Amanda, that we need the strength of PR. James, I think the PR are most important, and actually promoting the products also for its performance. It's like we've forgotten that. We have some amazing performance brands out there, and they're just talking about carbon footprint and recycling. Who cares? I need a jacket. Here in Norway, it's minus 30 degrees. I need to feel warm. And that's what I'm looking for. I do care about the carbon footprint, but I would also like to find a jacket that tells me that I'll stay warm or cool or something. That it's not that you only have, I think it's too much talking about that. I think some PR, not all, thinks that this is the key way of a selling product. But is that true? Is it the only thing consumer looks at when they go in the shop?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point. And it brings me to something I wanted to discuss kind of on the role of transparency and traceability and communication. There's this overarching need we've been talking about a lot about. We need to be clear. We need to, be transparent. We need to be traceable, know where our materials are coming from. But my question is, how much is too much, right? Because as we've all talked about, maybe the consumers don't really care that much on all of these really, really detailed sourcing down to the individual tree, right? Like Tricia for where materials are coming from. What are your perspectives now on what is actually the key information that people need to know, and what are we asking too much of innovators, right? That is impossible to know. And I'll start with Tricia. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, there's two parts to that question. What do consumers really need to know? And we're asked, especially by brands, for everything and all at once. Mm-hmm. We want 100% post-consumer. We want it fully traceable. We want a handheld scanner. We want it sourced within a geographic region. We want to know exactly where the cotton's coming from. And by the way, we want it at the same price or less than systems that have been around. And sometimes that can almost be exhausting. And so now I'm kind of take a step back and what's your priority? Where do we really need to begin? Because we can't do it all. And we're doing so much already. So if I look at where we've come from. But, how much is too much? I would say, I think it's important to understand certifications. Actually, today we just announced that we received our RCS certification for our new production line. So I think, certifications do play a role to kind of give that umbrella over some information. But then I think it comes down to knowing percentages of recycle. In my world, percentage of recycled content is very important. And to understand, where is that waste coming from? Where are the unused textiles coming from? And then, understanding the next steps of how it can be used, what materials can it be used in? But after that, getting into some of the nuances of, did the textiles, what percentage of spandex did they have? And what kind of coloration did they have? I think that just gets to be too much. And really, again, I find it's best when people can come and visit. I know that's not always the most ideal, but or reviewing a lot of the videos that we have to share. And I think that provides an enormous amount of information.
Really great point, though, of asking for all of these things and still expecting the price to be the same or less, right? I think we need to balance our expectations, right, with what we can deliver right now and where we might be able to go in the future, right? So it'd be great that if you could have a QR code on everything so that you always know where everything has come from. But right now, is that going to be possible for every product? Do they have the ability to trace back to, that individual raw material source? So it's really good.
Yeah, I like to say it's always progress over perfection. So let's just get going. Yeah,
that's definitely MII's view as well. We've got a lot to do. And on that note, we actually had some comments from the audience I wanted to bring up that were kind of related to this comp set. So you mentioned, Tricia, on percentages recycled, right? That's something that people want to know, and it's a relatively easy piece of information to give to people, right? This is this percent recycled. Another that comes up a lot is percent bio-based. This is kind of the new, I'd say, sustainability term of now that people are very intrigued by. Now, one, I don't think consumers know what this is. I don't think they have any idea what it is, know if it's sustainable or not, but it does seem like, at least within the circle of brands and innovators and manufacturers, it's something that comes up. So people have asked, well, do I need to be 100% or is 90% bio-based okay, right? Is offering a little bit more bio-based content into a polyurethane sustainable, or is it not, right? And these complex questions keep coming up constantly. For those that don't know in the audience, the term bio-based just means at least partially bio-based, with the remainder of the content being a fossil fuel-based material. So it only tracks the carbons in the material. Now, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but Tricia and Amanda, that both of your materials are 100% bio-based, based on what I know about their origins. Now, does that mean that all end products will still be bio-based, right? Because there could be mixes of materials. Now, Amanda, you have control over your in-house ettitude products, but Tricia, right, your materials could go on to be blended with other fibers that have been manufactured. Yes. So it's a really complex topic. We get this question a lot at MII. I wondered, from the innovator standpoint, what your perspective is on these terms, right? Like, and these percentages that need to come out, and what do you think is right or wrong, or what you've experienced. So just any comment on that would be great. Either of
I have a couple of thoughts on that. I think percentages are important so that you have, visibility into how much the actual content and makeup of the material is, but all bio-based isn't the same, and it can be processed in very harmful, harsh chemical environments as well. So just the content alone isn't clear on the true impact of that material. And like for us, we try to maintain as much control as possible, take it to the finished textile, but then it could go get coated with, a fire retardant that has harmful chemicals. So it's less about the percentage of bio-based content. It's the entire process, all the way to the finished garment, of every step that goes into it, not just the content, but the processing and the manufacturing process and the chemicals that it's being treated with. So it's a very complex conversation, and it's not one answer that just 90% bio-based is the best, or 100% you should only do 100% bio-based. It's not that simple. So yeah, again, it comes back to what Camilla was saying, is communicating the entire picture and not just wrapping it up into this beautiful present of, oh, it's bio-based, but then it was treated with all these harmful chemicals and it has all of these, plastic components added to it and zippers. And when it gets to a finished garment, it's not truly sustainable anymore. So it's complex, and it's getting as transparent as possible. I was going to go back to the brand conversation too, about communicating the level of transparency. And I think one thing is we've put so much pressure on the consumer voting on which brand to purchase because they're sustainable. It's not always the consumer's responsibility, though. It's the brand's responsibility to buy the right materials, and then they can continue to have their brand presence in the market and not have to lead with sustainability, even though they made the right choices, and it is fully traceable. So I think we need to kind of right size that a little bit, that we've gotten so heavy, and that's why greenwashing is so prevalent, because we're just trying to have the better story, but let's just try to do the right thing and make the brands responsible for doing the right thing.
Yeah, these are all great points. And Amanda, I loved your response on, we have to think holistically, right, about sustainability. And we can't really reduce anything to one word or one soundbite. And it's something that I, face a lot in trying to communicate the stakeholders in this group about what makes something sustainable, what's going into these formulations. And let me tell you, when we talk about communication, I am struggling to this day to get this information out clearly without just saying it's complicated and then let me write 20 pages to explain to you how complicated it is, right? And everyone thinks I'm such a buzzkill because I cannot write anything simply or say anything simply because I'm a scientist, I'm a nerd. But it is this challenge that we all need to maybe come to head here and say, like, listen, you really do have to listen to the whole story. And that story could be presented to you in digestible ways, like everyone has said here, maybe videos and, other explanations, touching and feeling and really like seeing the process. All of that can maybe help us, but we should probably stop trying to reduce things to like black and white, or this is the number, or this is the word that we need to achieve. And then therefore we've reached the goal of sustainability, because I think we all know sustainability is also constant iteration, right? We're not going to just stop where we are today. There's more paths to take forward to further reduce our impacts. So that's just from what I've seen, kind of trying to communicate with everybody here that's confused on a lot of this terminology and what it means and what's the best. It's not easy, it's not simple, but I think we can work together to be more effectively communicating on all of these holistic things that come together to make a material, sustainable. And then James, again, I want to bring you in here because we're talking about how it's so complex and nobody can understand it. And, do we just stop trying to explain it, at that outward facing consumer level? Like, I just want to bring it up again. Like, where do we stop and start? People have said that they will pay more for a sustainable product. So there's something to be said of marketing a material as sustainable, but how do we really balance, keeping the attention of the consumer, right? I'm not sure how we're going to do this.
I mean, that's, again, one statistic that people have said they're willing to pay more for. There's another statistic that the company called Shein, somebody mentioned, the growth of a company like that, where I don't think, sorry to call out any, a consumer, but, I don't think I'm imagining carbon impact and sustainability and next gen materials are not a big part of the Shein brand proposition. So, again, I would say we have to know who our audience is that we're talking to. And I think we have to, I worked sort of tangentially on a project that I'm imagining Levi's is still advocating for washing your jeans. There's a schedule of, doing it less than, and washing them once a month or something like that. Does everybody know that program?
Yeah.
It's so logical. It seems like something that would be so easily adaptable by every consumer. I don't know how successful it is. Maybe it has been very successful, but to me, it's an example of a program that, for as logical as it is, and something that we could easily all adapt to, I think has been very hard. I would imagine very challenging to get consumers to change their behavior as fundamentally as that. And essentially it's easier, cheaper, and better for you and the planet. And yet people are still running their jeans weekly through hot water and detergent in a plastic bottle, I'm afraid, So I think, I'll, like from the beginning, advocate for focusing the energy on the manufacturers and the users and the makers, and compliance and transparency and regulation, and let the consumer come along at his or her and their own pace, right? And sure, we will keep trying, and keep trying to make it sexy and appealing and clear. But when people are shopping, they're just in a very different head. And when they want to buy more clothes or replace clothes, it's a leap of fantasy, really, and science, and usually doesn't come into that moment.
Yeah, I think that's very true, sadly, for me, the scientist. But I don't get to be sexy, and that's okay. So I have another question. These are all related, of course, but kind of coming back to one concept, which is intellectual property. So if you're an innovator, Tricia and Amanda, you have intellectual property either on the processes, raw material formulations, whatever it may be, manufacturing, and how you kind of balance, keeping that protected, right? Making sure that you have your IP locked down, but then communicating and trying to be transparent, right, with people like brands who might want to know everything about your material. I'm curious how you've kind of navigated that aspect of the communication.
Yeah. Well, I'll pick up on that. I think we have 7 patents, and I believe we have, several that are still pending. It's not just the patents; it's the intellectual property and know-how that's really key. And I think at Renewcell, we're very transparent when we allow people to come through our facility, take pictures. Because I know in many times when I've been in other production facilities, you're not even allowed to have your phone with you. And I think there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I can't reveal that information. It's our patent. It's the same thing that every company has information that they don't share publicly. And it's fine to say, okay, I'm stopping at this point, but look, I share all this other information with you. I think another thing that's different for Renewcell is that we are a publicly listed company. So we do provide a lot of information that, within an innovator space, and as companies move from startup to scale up, and we're in the scale up mode, many companies don't share some of their struggles, where we make all of that a part of it, because that's part of being a public company. So yeah, I think there's times where you just need to pull back and say, not sharing that, but I share a lot of other information. So, and it's key. Smaller, younger companies, you're built off of your IP and your patents, and that's critical.
Amanda, you on that front?
Yeah, patenting can be a challenge sometimes too, because then your information is exposed. It is out there once you patent it. It is available. So there's a lot of balancing between what you want to patent, what you want to keep trade secret. And trade secret doesn't mean that it has to be totally secret. There's ways that you can explain a process or the components without giving too much know-how into how it's actually made. And yeah, I think what I love and what I've been experiencing lately in this industry is it's a very collaborative space. A lot of the innovators are working together to share information and support each other. So I think as I see the industry shifting, where it's not so much about protecting and keeping this distance between you and the other innovators out there. It's more, how can we learn from each other? How can we collaborate? How can we carve out our own space within this next gen material revolution, let's call it, and be transparent with the brands as we go. And I think it's being, like Tricia said, selective in what we're communicating, but as open and transparent as possible, where you're just having that balance between the two.
Definitely.
Yeah, I could.
Go ahead.
I think it's on the sort of compliance point of view. I think there's misunderstanding out there. Tricia, you say the brands are asking you everything, absolutely everything. But from a transparency and compliance point of view, it's social due diligence. It's of course chemical, and of course visibility in terms of facilities. But I experience, similar to you guys, as a label and packaging manager, very boring, but I also get asked questions that makes no sense. There is no traceability regulation asking that level of detail, nor is there any consumer who could care less. So there is a misunderstanding somewhere. This took on its own engine, and everybody's asking everything from everyone in case they'll need it, but you'll never need it, and nor will you ever find it again, nor will you even understand it, I think. So I feel your pain, Tricia, being asked everything, and you also, Amanda, want to protect something, and can I protect this, or am I supposed to give it because of compliance? But really, you're not. Social due diligence, chemical, of course, visibility and claims. Yeah, and then we all have to maybe calm down.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. It's this the approach that we try to take in terms of transparency is work with through our certifications and supplying the brands with our certifications versus trade secret information. And that's such a good way to communicate and validate what your efforts are without giving out too much information.
That's a great point. So I had one more question. Tricia, it's specific to you. You had mentioned something to me when we had first met about encompass marketing. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your thoughts there and how people might be able to learn from, this theory you have on encompass marketing.
Yeah. So after years of always talking about a push-pull marketing, where you're pushing into the supply chain, you're pulling through with retailers and brands. And that's typically how it's looked within a linear supply chain, right? And as we've done ingredient branding with fiber, that's how it's existed. But that model doesn't work when you're talking about circularity. And when you're talking about, as Amanda's saying, there's so much collaboration that's happening within the industry. And there's many players that are involved, because now we have new businesses that are a part of the conversation. And that's looking at collectors and sorters, because now we're taking those textiles, those unused textiles, and bringing them back in. So within this circle, we are encompassing everyone within that dialogue, within that conversation, because now it's important to me as a textile recycler of what dyes are you using? What other components are being added? Are you putting some other finishing treatment on? So I need to know what's happening throughout all the steps. And now we also see huge involvement from organizations like yours and other NGOs and associations, Accelerating Circularity, Transformers Foundation, Canopy, which is huge within the next gen space of man-made cellulosics. They're a part of the conversation too. And as a publicly traded company, we have our analysts and investors that are also, so everyone is a part of this. And I feel that, now it's no longer just marketing and trying to build your brand within, pushing and pulling. Now it's really how we're encompassing everyone within that dialogue. So this is our way that we look at going into the market and who the stakeholders are these days.
That's awesome. All right, well, we have 3 minutes left. I wondered if anybody has, a couple words of advice for someone that's entering the next gen material space brand new. We have a lot of new innovators that are showing up, that want to make new materials, which we encourage. We need more of it. But since all of you have such vast experience in this space, I wondered if you have a few words of advice, particularly with regards to communication, but it could be broad advice as well for the newcomers entering this space. So I'll start with Amanda, because Tricia was just talking.
Yeah, I would say just be very thoughtful about every process that you're putting your material through, and don't be scared to ask others in the industry for help or guidance. I think we're all in this together. We all have the same goal of trying to transform an industry to be more conscious and thoughtful and use the right materials. So wish you all the best of luck and amazing success. But yeah, just be open to collaborating and learning and be very thoughtful throughout the entire process. Even which certifications you work with, there's a lot of options out there, and you want to just make sure that the certifying body you're working with is truly upholding their standards.
Camilla, any last thoughts?
We worry that the next gen innovators will not feel ready to communicate their amazing work, but it's allowed to communicate the environmental friendly footprint of the material only. You don't have to talk about the whole product. Talk about your material, but towards the consumer, you should specify, I am talking about the lining of this jacket. It is a next gen material and it has this and this and this, so that you don't think you have to go throughout the whole product, because then you risk a greenwashing, which you don't deserve. You deserve to say all the good stuff. Just stay true exactly to what the good job you've done and what it's about.
All right. Any last thoughts for us, James?
I would just say, press and earned media is very important, but don't think it's the only thing. And try to, by joining associations and being part of the community, as Amanda's saying, you can share a lot of resources, and also think about just communicating, that every opportunity to communicate with even one person is useful.
Perfect. Well, this was an amazing session. I want to thank all of the speakers for all of your insights on this very complex topic. I think we covered a lot of different concepts today. With that, we'll have our speakers exit the stage, and I will talk a little bit about what we've learned today. So, again, thank you to all of our speakers, our passionate audience for joining us on our first day of the conference. These first few sessions have already covered so much ground. In our first panel, we heard firsthand about a lot of the best practices to commercialize next-gen materials from brands and innovators. And here, a core theme was collaboration. I think we just discussed it again, actually. But within that collaboration, we heard these terms of trust, honesty, and transparency. We also heard a theme of patience, right? And that achieving performance and quality is critical, that we shouldn't rush products to market. In this most recent panel, we stressed that importance of communication, really that fine line of marketing versus compliance versus transparency. We have so much more to uncover over the next few days, including perspectives on next-gen business strategies and scaling challenges, environmental impact issues, the role of synthetic alternatives in our new landscape, and innovator spotlights. So feel free to continue your networking within the platform in the meantime. Send messages to your fellow attendees, and we're going to finish our programming for the day. We look forward to keeping the discussions going tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.